by verse. So we've been in Hebrews chapter 7 now. This is our third week, and we've been studying specifically and talking about Melchizedek and this guy Melchizedek. And I'm like, who is this dude Melchizedek and what's going on? And here's what finally kind of clicked with me a little bit this week is like, hey, there's something at the forefront here that's being talked about in Hebrews chapter 7 that has a hard time registering with us. Like, we don't just naturally understand what's happening. It really has a lot to do with the sacrificial system of Israel. The Jewish sacrificial system, it's kind of unrelatable to us. It's not something that's on our radar. Maybe it's yours, right? But it's not on mine. So I don't wake up and have an animal sacrifice every morning for my sins of the previous day, right? And if I did, like, A, you would probably avoid me, and B, you would probably, at some point, somebody's going to call the cops, right? Because I'm sacrificing something, right? We're like, whoa, that's kind of out there. But that's exactly what's in view here, and it's weird to us. We don't understand it. So a couple of weeks ago when we started, I said, hey, complete this jingle. The best part of waking up is Folgers in your cup, right? And so we talked about that, and probably 80, just like this morning, probably 80%, 75, 80% of the room knew exactly what I was talking about, and the other 20 or so percent that didn't know what I was talking about, didn't know the jingle, you related pretty quickly. You're like, okay, I've smelled coffee before, right? So it resonated to go, oh, this is the aroma of what is to come. Melchizedek being the aroma of what is to come, he points to Jesus, right? He's not the cup of coffee, he's the aroma of coffee. It makes sense to us, but when we say sacrifice, not something that normally registers. So if I said, and I'll test you here, if I said, complete this statement, a hope that enters into the inner place behind the curtain where Jesus has, anybody? Where Jesus has gone on our behalf. Hebrews chapter 6, verse 20. We don't get it, right? It doesn't. So that's why maybe over the past couple of weeks, this seems like a little bit more of like, hey, this is a little deeper part of the study because we're having to dig a little bit more to understand what's going on because it doesn't just naturally resonate. It's not in our culture or our language. It's not in a normative action, our work or our study or whatever. So we have to read and we have to study and we have to pay attention in order to get it. And I think that's very much what Hebrews chapter 7 is happening to us. And so what I want to do today is, as we kind of focus this whole entire series on the reality that Jesus is better, we've compared Jesus against a bunch of different things already in the first half of Hebrews. So what I want us to do is kind of say, we wrap up this first half. We're going to take a break starting after this week for the next several weeks as we kind of focus in on the Advent season. We'll pick back up in Hebrews chapter 8 in January. But I want us to see why all this matters. Like, why does Melchizedek even matter? Like, why is this in here? This dude is he's only mentioned 2 times, right? Genesis 14, Psalm 110. Why is this author taking the whole chapter 7 to really unpack that? Why does this matter? So I want to kind of connect some dots, fill in some gaps so that we'll see Jesus is better. I have a primary idea today. If you like to write things down, you're a note taker, you want to go to your group and show off a little bit. Here's what you want to write down. Temporary fixes and imperfect efforts always leave us searching for more. Can I say that again? Temporary fixes and imperfect efforts always have us searching for more. So Hebrews chapter 7, we're going to look at 23 through the end of the chapter today. I'm going to actually start one verse ahead. I didn't tell the guys, so there's probably not a slide back there, but verse number 22, and the reason I'm going to read 22 is because it kind of sets the context. John talked about this a little bit last week. This makes Jesus the guarantor of a better covenant. This makes Jesus the guarantor of a better covenant. Why do we start there? For a couple of reasons. A, this is the author of Hebrews. This is kind of his style. He'll drop a hint about something that he's going to pick up later. We're going to talk more about New Covenant, Old Covenant later. But this makes Jesus the guarantor of a better covenant because Jesus becomes the subject for the rest of the chapter. No, we're no longer talking about Melchizedek. Jesus becomes front and center, but his name is only given to us here in verse number 22. The rest of the time, it's all pronouns referring to him. So if you look down, verse 24, but he holds the priesthood, right? He is able to save. He always lives. We just see this over and over and over. And I want you to know that all of that is referring specifically back to Jesus per verse 22. Jesus, the guarantor of a better covenant. And the covenant very much is insider language. This is something that we don't often use covenant language, right? We talk about contracts and promises and stuff like that. A covenant is an unbreakable, eternal, lifetime bond, right? It's an unbreakable bond for life. One of the ways that they used to mark covenants is they would take the palm of your right hand and they would take a knife and cut across the surface of your right-handed palm. And the reason they would do that is because when you would go to shake your hand and introduce yourself to somebody, you extend your right hand and they would immediately see that you're in a covenant relationship. Right? So covenant is a lifetime, unbreakable bond. And it says that he's the guarantor of a better covenant, which infers that there's an old covenant and a new covenant. Jesus very much gives us this language. Old covenant, new covenant. We'll unpack that again starting in much greater detail in January, but I want to give you the highlights. Old covenant is kind of the Mosaic law. It starts with Abraham in Genesis chapter number 12, where God gives him a promise to be the father of many nations, and there's lots of that going on, and it generally refers to the Mosaic law that's created in the first 5 books of the Old Testament. The sacrificial system, all of that is based in the Old Covenant. If you just kind of want to simplify it a little bit, here's what I want you to know about the Old Covenant. The Old Covenant is based on rules and rituals. Okay, so I want you to associate in your brain, Old Covenant, rules and rituals. So anything that's old, rules and rituals. The New Covenant, based on Jesus' sacrifice. Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection, which we see in the Gospels, it's a covenant of grace. Inaugurated by Jesus, made possible by Jesus. And so again, simplifying things where the Old Covenant based on rules and rituals, the New Covenant based on relationship and renewal. Catching, following me? Okay? So this makes Jesus the guarantor of a better covenant. Verse 23. The former priests were many in number. Former, again, Old Covenant priests. So make that connection in your head. The former priests were many in number because they were prevented by death from continuing in office. But that's Jesus, but Jesus holds his priesthood permanently because he continues forever. Consequently, he is able to save. That's a key phrase that you want to circle, highlight. He is able to save to the utmost those who draw near to him or draw near to God through him, since he always lives to make intercession. For it was indeed fitting, circle that word, we'll get back there. It was indeed fitting that we should have such a high priest, holy, innocent, unstained, separated from sinners, and exalted above the heavens. He has no need, like those high priests, to offer sacrifices daily, first for his own sins and then for those of his people. Since he did this once for all when he offered up himself, for the law appoints men in their weaknesses as high priests, but the word of the oath, which came later than the law, appoints a son who has been made perfect forever. Those last 2 words, perfect forever, kind of encapsulate Jesus' priesthood. This is something that this author has been building for multiple weeks to get us to this point that Jesus' priesthood is based on permanence and perfection. Permanence and perfection. If we were to separate these by the paragraphs that you see in your Bible, these first couple verses, for the former priests were many in number, right? The priests of the priesthood of Aaron, the Levitical priests, the Old Covenant priests, because they were prevented by death. That's to say that they were fatally flawed. We get it? Okay, I'm just making sure. I have to do this with my daughters occasionally, just make sure. Pause, give them a second. They were fatally flawed. They were prevented by death, right? They were human, and they could not go on forever and ever and ever. Right? So they were fatally flawed. But Jesus, it says, but he holds his priesthood permanently because he continues forever. He has this permanence. And it tells us right here in verse number 25 that his permanence, consequently, is able to save. So this is an attribute of Jesus' priesthood, of what Jesus inaugurated, of the new and better covenant made possible because of the eternality of Jesus. I want us to catch that, because when I ask this question, and this is something that's come up in our small group several times over the past few weeks, why is Melchizedek in here? Why does this matter? When we go back to Genesis chapter 14 and Psalm 110, both of which talk about Melchizedek, we can actually stay here in Hebrews and go back to verse number 3 in chapter number 7, which is a couple pages if you're using your journaling Bible. You go back to verse number 3, talking about Melchizedek. This is what it says. He is without father or mother or genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but resembling the Son of God, he continues a priest forever. This priesthood, this order of Melchizedek, which is again quoted here in verse number 15 and again in verse number 21, you are a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. That's a quotation from Psalm 110, describing the coming Messiah. The Lord has sworn, verse 21, the Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever, Psalm 110. Again, a quotation from Psalm 110 talking about the Messiah in the order of Melchizedek. Melchizedek is on the scene. Why this is important? Because the former priests were many in number. They were prevented by death. But the order of Melchizedek goes on and on and on forever. Jesus' permanence, his eternality in the priesthood is coming from the order of Melchizedek. Right? The order of the priesthood of Aaron, the Levitical priesthood, not permanent. We don't see that anywhere in the instructions, anywhere in the Old Testament. But Melchizedek, although he himself was not eternal, the priesthood that God established through him is eternal, made eternal by Jesus. Again, Melchizedek is not the answer by any means. He is a human. But his priesthood, inaugurated by God, was what ultimately came and produced the Messiah, who is the priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. Melchizedek was the aroma of eternality, made possible ultimately in Jesus, fulfilled by Jesus. Verse 26, for it was indeed fitting that we should have such a high priest. Listen to the way that it describes Jesus. Holy, innocent, unstained, separated from sinners, and exalted above the heavens. He has no need. Like, that's an incredible description of Jesus. Right? And the first couple of verses was the crossroads of temporary and permanence. The second handful of verses are the crossroads of the imperfect and the perfect, the flawed and the flawless. Jesus, holy, innocent, unstained, separated, and exalted. No need like the priests, the other priests, the old covenant priests. No need like they had need of daily sacrifices. The old covenant priests, daily sacrifices for their own sins, then for the sins of the people, because they were imperfect, flawed. Jesus had no need because he was perfect. Do you see the difference? We have this permanence and this perfection fulfilled completely in Jesus. This old covenant, they needed sacrifices for their own sins. They were imperfect and flawed, but Jesus, right? And this gives us a foreshadowing. Again, the old covenant, it's imperfect. And actually, as we read last week, right, it's useless under the new covenant. Its whole design was to lead us to the cup, not to the aroma. So both the order of Melchizedek and the Levitical priesthood were to serve as an aroma, leading us to the cup, which is Jesus. This old covenant introduces this idea of the sacrificial system. That's the part we have a hard time understanding. The sacrifices that were needed were basically, it's what we refer to theologically as the atonement. Atonement means payment. And atonement is what the Levitical priesthood brings to the table, this idea of sacrifice. So the need for sacrifice is a result of sin. There's a punishment because of sin, because of our imperfection. There's a punishment. There's something that causes that we have to deal with. And the only way to deal with that is a sacrifice, to atone for, to pay for. Right? So the order of Melchizedek, which we look back, says nothing about atonement. It has nothing about sacrifices. It has everything to do with permanence and eternality, but it doesn't say anything about sacrifices. The Levitical system is all about sacrifices and nothing about eternality. So when we put the two together, this is where we see permanence and perfection. Paul says in Romans chapter 3, the wages of sin is death. Right? The punishment, the product of our sin is death. It was consistent with the Jewish understanding of sin, of sacrifice, and atonement. And just like Melchizedek wasn't eternal, rather the aroma of eternality, Aaron's priesthood couldn't offer an eternal atonement. It was something that had to happen over and over and over again. It was repetitive, ritualistic. Why? Because it was imperfect. It wasn't designed to be the solution. It was designed to be the aroma that led us to the solution. So just like Melchizedek was the aroma of eternality, atonement in the Jewish system is the aroma of true atonement. True atonement that can only be captured by Jesus. Since he did this, it says, verse 27, once and for all when he offered up himself. The one who is holy and innocent, unstained, separated, and exalted. Jesus is the Son who is both perfect and permanent. Let me illustrate this idea for a second. Temporary fixes and imperfect efforts. Temporary fixes. How many things in this world distract us from reality? A lot, right? There's a lot of things. We can get lost in a heartbeat. I am a fatally flawed person. I can get lost scrolling funny videos on Facebook. It's easy. Now I'm getting all these AI-generated videos, which are hilarious, by the way, right? I am easily distracted, a simple-minded guy. Whether it's social media, binge watching a TV series, playing, Madden 25 a whole season on a Saturday to predict the Super Bowl winners, whatever it is. Could be fixation on a diet, an exercise routine. Could be a bonus at work or an upcoming promotion that we just get so locked into that nothing else matters. And we're putting all of our focus and all of our attention on temporary fixes. Sometimes we might even go to church because we want to feel something that we can't feel. Sometimes we get stuck serving others just for the sake of being busy and wanting to feel good. These temporary fixes. Sometimes we self-medicate. Drink, alcohol, drugs. Sometimes it's just food. Caution with Thanksgiving week, right? But listen, whether it's a distraction or a self-medication or a religious ritual, no matter what it is, these things will never, ever satisfy because we will always want more. They will never satisfy because they were never designed to satisfy. They do not have the capacity to satisfy. Whether it's any of those things, here's the thing is you know that they won't satisfy. Deep down, you know that, right? Temporary fixes won't satisfy. Imperfect efforts won't satisfy. It's not an escape or medicine. Rather, we're just kind of action-oriented. And these imperfect efforts, if I can only do more or volunteer more or stay here or do this or write this or create this or sell that. And deep down, if we're honest with ourselves, what we're really shooting after is, if I can do these things, then this person or my spouse or my pastor or my teacher or my boss or even God, if I can do this, then he'll be happy with me. And that's why we're pursuing those things and we don't even know it. And we're just like, man, if I can just accomplish this or give more effort, then I'll get they'll like me, they'll approve of me, they'll love me more, they won't be mad. And when temptation knocks and doubt arises, all we're left with is just willpower. We're like, I just have to will this to kick the habit or to change my identity or my behavior and start over. And here's the thing is, it just never works. Temporary fixes and imperfect efforts. And they leave us searching for more. So can I just maybe speak to your head for a second? Right? I don't know about you, but there's some for sure in the room that just I deal with my brain processes information logically, and it just makes sense, right? And so I just want to kind of appeal to your logic and reason for a quick second. And look what it says in verse number 26. For it was indeed fitting. What is it saying? Here's what this is saying. This makes sense. Right? It makes sense that we should have a high priest. It makes sense that if there's a God of the universe, a creator God who oversees and sustains and created everything, it would make sense that he is holy and innocent and unstained and separated, and he's high and exalted, and he has no need for anything. It would make sense, right? It doesn't make sense that it would be that I would find satisfaction or identity or purpose in a cup of coffee, right? Or in a dollar that I get from a bonus or a title that's before or after my name. It doesn't make sense that any of those things would be ultimately what would be fulfilling. It only makes sense, it's fitting that we should have a high priest who's way above. It just makes sense, right? It's logical. How could it be anything else? Something man-made or man-centered. It's just like, it's ridiculous to think about that, because every single one of us in the room, we all know when we look at holy, innocent, unstained, separated, exalted, and then I look at me, when you look at you, I do not fit that definition. And we know that. We can pretend, right? But that doesn't do anybody any good. We know this, and it only makes sense. We've seen these temporary priests come and go. And we think there has to be more. And the reason we think there has to be more, because there is more. So if I could just also take a second to maybe speak to your heart. Like, I want you to feel this. This is something that Stephanie tells me is called emotion, right? That was a joke too, just for the record, right? Deep down, I want you to know this is like an intentional and personal sacrifice that Jesus makes for us. It says in verse 25, consequently, he is able to save. He's able to save to the utmost those who draw near to God through him, since, watch what it says, he always lives to make intercession for them, for you. Jesus lives with you in mind. This personal sacrifice that he made of himself, the holy, innocent, unstained one that was not deserving of any of that. The reason that he did all of that was with you in mind. If you're thinking, nobody sees me, I don't have a voice, no one does even care. Like, you read this scripture, and I want you to know he always lives to make intercession for you. All of that happened with you in mind. God knows your loneliness, right? He knows your need for peace. your significance. And he wants to give you something that's lasting and real. Temporary fixes and imperfect efforts always leave us searching for more. Only Jesus' permanence and perfection make sense. Melchizedek, Aaron, they only point to Jesus. They can't be the one. Right? They're just whispers, if you will, aromas, hints of the one who is able to save. Jesus is the only logical, capable solution, and Jesus' love makes him the only willing solution. There's only one who will never leave you searching for more, and his name is Jesus. The invitation today is simple. If you've never trusted in Jesus, I invite you today to put your trust in him. And what does that look like? Here's what it looks like. You and God having a conversation. That conversation, the Bible calls prayer. I use the language surrender. This is what it looks like for me. Full sin, full surrender. This is what Jesus calls us to as a better life. And here's what it takes is confession that I am not the way, and confession that Jesus is the way, and my faith and hope and trust are in him. Right? That's something you can do right now, but I'm telling you, if you're just doing it because of religion or ritual, you're going to be disappointed. But if you're doing it for relationship and renewal, Jesus will meet you where you are. He will take your hurts and your pains, and he will heal you from those things. Jesus will give you a brand new life, and it's life in him. That's ultimately what you're created for. It's ultimately what fulfills, not anything in this world, nothing that we can make up or create on our own. And so I just simply invite you to trust him today. Let's pray together, church.